On the first day of 2026, two socialists, Zoran Mandani and Kerry Wilson, were inaugurated as the mayors of New York City and Seattle, respectively. Another socialist is running for mayor in Los Angeles. While the next presidential election may seem far away and will likely be contentious with many on the left furious at President Trump right now, we shouldn't dismiss the possibility of a broader rise of socialist candidates across America. I want to talk about socialism, but should I? As a pastor, my priority is preaching the gospel for the salvation of souls. Even if socialism is not the optimal way to run an economy, and even if I personally oppose it, should I hold back from speaking about socialism unless it directly affects the gospel? Another question is my own competence. What do I really know about socialism? Isn't it better to remain silent than to speak publicly on an issue you know little about? Certainly not enough to address with confidence. All this to say, if my responses to these two questions are inadequate, then this will be my last vlog on socialism. But if I'm able to answer them responsibly, I plan to produce several more. Let me address the second question first, my competence. While my academic training is primarily in theology, I completed graduate work in Asian American studies, which, like many other ethnic studies fields, is often sympathetic to socialist ideas. Building on that foundation, I recently read 4 books on socialism and its implications. For a pro-socialist perspective, I read Nathan Robinson's Why You Should Be a Socialist 2019. Robinson, the publisher of the progressive magazine Current Affairs and a Harvard PhD in sociology and social policy, writes clearly and conversationally. To counterbalance Robinson, I read Jason Brennan's 2024 book, Why Not Capitalism? Brennan, who specializes in politics, philosophy, and economics at Georgetown University, also writes with clarity. I also read Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies, 2011, and his more recent Social Justice Fallacies, 2023. With this background, I believe I can adequately address key questions raised by socialism, which seeks to replace capitalism as the dominant mode of production and distribution. But as I mentioned earlier, should I speak about socialism at all, given that I care more about winning souls than debating economic systems? Based on my research, I believe I do have a responsibility to address socialism for the following reason. In a chapter titled A Better World, Envisioning Utopias, Robinson surveys various utopian visions throughout history. The most outlandish is that of Charles Fourier, an 18th century French socialist theorist who believed the seas would one day turn to lemonade. More seriously, the utopia that caught my attention was the one envisioned in William Morris's News from Nowhere. Summarizing it, Robinson writes that a visitor finds himself in future England with no government, no church, and no wage labor. People simply give each other whatever they need, everyone's needs are met, and the people devote themselves to the higher pleasures of life. Having never heard of William Morris, I looked him up. He was, among other things, a 19th century English social activist who advocated for socialism. What alarmed me was his background. Morris was born into a wealthy Anglican middle-class family with an evangelical heritage. Intending to enter the clergy, he went to Oxford to study theology, but during his time there, he loved his Christian faith and turned instead to art and socialism as a tools for addressing social injustice. Later in life, he was described as a pagan or atheist. Now, I don't know whether exposure to socialism weakened Morris's faith or whether an already questioning faith simply found a home in socialism. What is clear is that socialism can be quite appealing to conscientious, perhaps slightly naive, Christians who lack grounding in both the nature of socialism and the teaching of Scripture. Before explaining why, it's important to clarify which socialism we are talking about. On the one hand, there is social democracy exemplified by countries like Norway, where the government provides extensive social services such as universal health care and paid maternity leave, funded by high taxes. On the other hand, there are democratic socialists such as Mandani, Wilson, and Robinson. So they are not the same. Social democrats and democratic socialists. How do they differ from social democrats? While they also support expanded welfare program, democratic socialists won't be satisfied until society becomes a utopia characterized by, as Robinson puts it, quote, a total elimination of exploitation and hierarchy and a change in the structure of who owns capital. It's where people have ownership over their work, end of quote. This explains why Robinson rejects any comparison between his version of socialism, where the benevolent state harms no one, and the regimes commonly labeled socialist, such as the Soviet Union and North Korea, and Venezuela, where the state has oppressed its people. Here's where Robinson, as an avowed atheist, does not see what I, as a Bible-believing Christian, sees. These socialist regimes have often been hostile toward Christians, treating them as an outgroup worthy of persecution. Many believers died in the Soviet Union and North Korea. In Venezuela, during the mid-2000s, Hugo Chavez, whom Nicolas Maduro succeeded, expelled many Western missionaries and made it difficult for others to obtain religious visas. It can be argued that exposure to this kind of socialism threatens the faith of naive and uninformed Christians because its materialist worldview denies anything beyond the physical, spirits, revelation, and of course, God. I'm referring here to Marxism, the most radical form of socialism in which Marx famously called religion, quote, the opium of the people, end of quote. What does that mean? Robinson explains that Marx's issue is not with religion, but with the condition that makes religion necessary. Repeating, Marx's issue is not with religion, but with the condition that makes religion necessary. In other words, once a utopian society is achieved, where workers rule collectively, religion becomes unnecessary. There is no need for God. In this sense, the utopias envisioned by Morris and Robinson are not fundamentally different from the one Marx, raised in nominally Christian environment but decisively embracing atheism in his early adulthood, anticipated. And in this way, socialism touches the gospel. Why then might naive or conscientious Christians, perhaps like William Morris, be drawn to the kind of socialism Robinson advocates? It may be because they are genuinely troubled by certain evangelical churches that seem indifferent to the suffering that Robinson highlights. Global poverty, preventable diseases, and the moral discomfort of knowing these realities while doing little about them. His critique is sharp, says Robinson, quote, indifference and inaction in the face of suffering is monstrous, end of quote. My point is this. Not every observation made by socialists like Robinson is wrong. Some of it is compelling. And this is precisely where socialism may appear attracted to Christians who feel frustrated by churches that seem unconcerned about the poor, even as they focus on making their sanctuaries bigger and better. It may not take long before they embrace socialist program as a solution to these problems. What's the issue with that? First, many socialist programs in the long run cause more harm than good because they arise from what Thomas Sowell calls an unconstrained vision of human nature. The belief that people are shaped entirely by the environment rather than possessing a fixed, flawed nature. More to be explained in later vlogs. Second, embracing socialism, deeply humanistic and ultimately godless, can displace faith in God altogether, which is exactly what Marx envisioned. For these reasons, I plan to produce several more vlogs to examine the errors of socialism and its various social programs.